looking out at you this morning and seeing so many families, this expression I've heard a fair amount recently on social media sort of things, the gathering of the clans came to mind. The families are probably starting to reunite for our celebration of Christmas, and so welcome to any family members, friends. Some of you have traveled some distance to be here, I know, and so welcome to Transfiguration. I hope you have a great visit. I hope your travels were pleasant. In this story, in the Christmas story, there's a lot of traveling in the background, right? In the telling of the visitation story, Our Lady travels in haste to visit her relative Elizabeth. And as you know, travel can be difficult, even dangerous. My fictional friend Tex was recently traveling and experienced some danger. Well, danger of a sort. He was actually pulled over for reckless driving, but even though he was ticketed for reckless driving, he was grateful for the police officer's intervention. When pulled over, Tex explained, "Officer, I'm so glad you're here. I don't know what's happening. I got my car washed at one of those fancy new car washes where they even clean the inside of the car. And when I got back into the car and drove away, a tree appeared right in front of me. So I swerved out of the way, but then another tree appeared in front of me. So I swerved out of the way of that tree, and then another tree appeared in my way. I swerved out of the way of that tree." And after about a minute of this explanation, the police officer interrupted Tex and said, "Sir, I'd suggest removing the pine-scented air freshener hanging from your rearview mirror." Mary must have had travel concerns. These are passed over, though, somewhat surprisingly, without mention at all. Her visitation journey it's essentially a trip to Jerusalem, which is really significant. Elizabeth and Zechariah's home would have been just about 2 miles west of Jerusalem, of sort of the temple area of Jerusalem. And so this is essentially a trip to Jerusalem from Nazareth. That route, it's 60 miles as the crow flies. The route would probably be closer to 90 when you factor in the twists and turns and going down the Jordan Valley, not across the top of the mountains in the center of the country. And it's a trip that would have been quite similar to the more famous subsequent trip she'd take with Joseph to Bethlehem, because Bethlehem's just 5 miles south of Jerusalem. So they're basically really similar trips. And that Jerusalem is the destination is really significant. On her journey to visit Elizabeth, Jesus is with Mary, the prenatal Jesus, right? Mary carries Jesus to the home of Elizabeth, into her presence, and Elizabeth is inspired by the Holy Spirit and recognizes many things, including that Jesus is God, right? She says, "How does this happen to me that the mother of my Lord should come to me? How does this happen to me that the mother of my Lord should come to me?" So she's recognizing Jesus as God, and then is significant too in our tradition that Mary is the mother of God. This statement from Elizabeth is almost certainly intended to be reminiscent of an extremely significant biblical figure, King David, right? King David, 1,000 years earlier, when the Ark of the Covenant was being carried into Jerusalem, David exclaimed, "How can the Ark of the Lord come to me? How can the Ark of the Lord come to me?" David said this when he was bringing the Ark of the Covenant into his new capital city of Jerusalem, which he had recently captured from the natives there, and he wanted to make this a unifying capital for all of Israel, a sort of a relatively neutral site, since he had captured it from non-Jews. Also reminiscent of the King David story, of King David in the visitation story, is John the Baptist leaping in Elizabeth's womb. That's significant of King David, reminiscent of King David, because King David leapt and danced before the Ark of the Covenant as it entered into Jerusalem. And the connection to David and the Ark of the Covenant is significant. In the Old Testament, the Ark of the Covenant was the visible symbol of God's invisible presence. It was the visible symbol of God's invisible presence. It was considered to be the earthly footstool of God's throne. Not only that, the ark contained the most significant relics of the Israelites' Exodus journey. And the artifact, the relic of probably most significance in the sense of capturing of our imagination would have been the tablets of the Ten Commandments. But in a way that's really significant in the Christmas story and for Christianity and for us as Catholics, is that in that Ark of the Covenant was a jar of the manna, the heavenly bread that God had fed the Israelites with in the desert. There was a jar of manna in the Ark of the Covenant. And this symbolism of the bread obviously continues to be so significant for us today in our celebration of the Eucharist and Jesus as the bread of life, right? So the connection is really significant, this connection between the visitation story elements and John the Baptist and the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant, it was brought into Jerusalem by King David once he had become the king and acquired the ark, and then his son would build the temple, and the Ark of the Covenant would reside in the temple for about 400 years. It would be, the Ark of the Covenant would remain in the temple in Jerusalem, in the Holy of Holies. This is where God was present and where the most significant sacrifices would take place because it was in God's presence. But the ark was lost, right? The temple was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC. And when the temple was destroyed, the ark was lost. The Israelites went into exile and they come back, and the temple is rebuilt 70 years later, but it's very different. It's called the Second Temple. It's not Solomon's temple anymore. It's the Second Temple, and it doesn't have the ark. It does not have the ark. The ark is lost. And though all Jews would have considered that God was present in the Second Temple as God had been present in Solomon's temple, for the most sort of rigorous, the most traditional, there almost certainly was a significant sense of loss, that without the ark, without that visible reminder of God's presence, without God's footstool being present, something was missing. And there would be a desire, even a longing for the return of the Ark of the Covenant. And in a really significant, though admittedly subtle and hidden way, this desire for the return of the ark to Jerusalem is fulfilled in the visitation, right? Mary is carrying, she is the visible presence of the invisible God because he dwells in her womb, right? She is the ark of the new covenant, and she is bringing the Lord back to Jerusalem. And so, as I said, the Blessed Virgin Mary is called the Ark of the New Covenant. God dwells in Mary in the most unique and significant of ways, and she brings Jesus to Elizabeth and to John and to Zechariah. And we too, by baptism, are temples, even arks of the Lord, invited to bring Jesus to others. So Mary brings the Lord to Elizabeth and John. We too are invited to bring the Lord to others. We become these temples, these arks of the Lord by our baptism. But it can admittedly be difficult at times. And strangely, ironically, it can seem that even during our annual celebration of the Lord's birth, it can be difficult because there's so many other things pressing on us for our attention. Material concerns and sadly, even secular concerns that compete for our time and attention. But I urge all of us to invite and bring others to our celebration of the Lord's birth, especially and most significantly, inviting others to Christmas Mass, right? Christmas Mass. It's redundant, and we don't even recognize it. Christmas is a contraction of just two words, Christ and Mass. It's the Christ Mass. That's what Christmas is. Mass is essential to Christmas. It's not Christmas without the Mass. And so we have this wonderful opportunity to bring others to experience Jesus. We receive Jesus, we encounter Jesus, we visit with Jesus, not in just a sentimental way. And those are beautiful ways when we see a beautiful nativity scene, when we hear a beautiful song on the radio and we were reminded of Jesus. Yes, those are good and valuable things, but in the Mass we encounter Jesus in his word and then most significantly in the sacrament of his body and blood, that bread of life, the bread of life, where we experience Jesus in the most robust of ways. So as we prepare to visit with Jesus in Holy Communion at this Mass, may we think in a way that is reminiscent of King David and of Elizabeth by wondering, as we recognize that we are going to receive the Lord, may we think, how is it that my Lord should come to me? How is it that my Lord should come to me and desire to invite others to have that same kind of visit with Jesus in Christmas in just now 6 days?